Hi, everybody. We're going to get started again. I have been looking forward to this panel for a while. And I'll explain a little bit about why, and I will set up the issue for this panel by starting with a statistic which was recently published by the National Labor Relations Board, which reports that so far this year, 43,000 workers have won recognition via NLRB elections, which basically puts us on a pace for 60,000 workers to earn recognition via NLRB elections in this year, which will be the most in a long, long time. People are very excited about this. There's a lot in the press about successful organizing at Starbucks, Amazon, other places as well. But this number, 60,000, isn't nearly enough. So yesterday, we heard from Ruth Milkman about the huge disconnection between support for unions, which is especially strong amongst young people today, and unionization rates. In this room, probably a lot of people that more or less know the reason why. Labor law is terrible. Union busting is only getting more fierce and more sophisticated. Corporations are larger. They're able to deploy more resources. The ability of workers to affect profitability through their action is becoming more and more remote. There was an article in Vox yesterday which said that of the 200 plus Starbucks stores that have successfully won NLRB certification, only 3 are in contract negotiations. The chances that contracts are going to be won at all 200 of these stores is small. Another problem that's weirdly undiscussed in the labor movement or by labor scholars or labor journalists is the impact of the Janus decision. The Janus decision was designed to undermine public sector unions. This is a problem for public sector unions. It's also a problem for the labor movement as a whole because public sector workers tend to make more, which means they also tend to pay more in dues, which means that a lot of the ability of unions to have resources to do things that they need to do to rebuild themselves, to have an impact on the working class generally, depends upon that kind of support. Basically, nobody's really talking about this much, and there are plenty of good reasons why. But my guess is that unions that aren't particularly good are probably bleeding members. And the ones that are good are successfully dealing with Janus, but they're doing so by having to invest resources, time into maintaining their member base, resources which could have been spent doing other things to organize new workers, have more effective political action, and whatever else. But the labor movement isn't just workers who are in unions and under contract. All movements are more than the sum of their organizational parts to the extent that they are actually a movement together and not just a set of organizations. So the current wave of organizing is being supported by networks of activists and other organizations that are not unions in any traditional sense. We have the example of Minneapolis, where a uprising for Black lives and racial justice and against police violence has fed into a wave of organizing in that city. For this reason, oh boy. The current enthusiasm for workplace activism and unionization can fuel a lot of innovative energy, even if it's not going to be immediately recognized in large numbers of new people under contract. So the worst thing that we can do is assume that one type of organization or one process for organizing, like the NLRB process, gets us where we need to go. But at the same time, I do not believe we need to, I believe that we need to keep our eye on the strategic goal and think seriously about how we get there. We need to be thinking in terms of millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people. And there's a large number of organizations out there that claim to be working towards that goal. But sometimes I wonder whether they are, whether they be worker centers, co-ops, mutual aid networks, organizing networks. These all have a role to play. But it's not clear that they are, as Marcia Howard put it yesterday, all rowing in the same direction. So figuring out how to build and leverage the resources available to mobilize and organize on the scale necessary to meet the challenge of the moment is not discussed enough, in my opinion. But I want to focus our attention on that problem today. And for that reason, we have what I view, I'd have a hard time imagining 4 people that I would rather have discussing this. We have Rebecca Gorelli, who is a former Chicago Teachers Union member and former Chicago teacher who was involved in the 2012 strike in Chicago, which in my opinion is one of the key events that kicked off the teacher strikes that followed. Rebecca moved from Chicago to Arizona and then immediately became involved in Red for Ed in Arizona and was a strike leader in Red for Ed for Arizona here and is a lead organizer for Red for Ed. Ruth Milkman is Distinguished Professor of Sociology at the City University of New York Graduate Center and leads the Labor Studies program there. Marcia Howard is Vice President of the Minnesota Federation of Teachers, a leader in George Floyd Square, and a teacher, English teacher at Roosevelt High School. And Cedric de Leon is a Professor of Sociology at UMass Amherst, and he directs the Labor Center there. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Cedric, who has an answer to this question. And that is going to give something for our other panelists to respond to. But I will continue prompting with questions, and I will be calling on you to follow up with questions about how we can think through the strategic problem. So join me in welcoming our panelists, and we'll bring up Cedric.
The title of my talk is For an Eclectic Mass Movement. August 28th, 1963 began inauspiciously. Reporters had been promised a major protest, yet they were the only people on the National Mall in Washington. Turning to Bayard Rustin, the event's organizer, the reporters asked, "Where are all the people?" Annoyed and wondering to himself whether anyone would show up, Rustin whipped out a document, glanced at his pocket watch, and said smoothly, "It's all coming according to schedule." He would later confess that he was looking at a blank piece of paper. Within hours, the mall would be occupied by some 200,000 people, 40,000 of them union members. That protest was called the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Rustin, the strategic mastermind behind the protest, was assistant to A. Philip Randolph, president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and the Negro American Labor Council, or NALC. NALC was an independent Black labor federation formed in 1959 to integrate the labor movement. It was NALC that hired Rustin to plan the march and served as treasurer for the event. Indeed, the March on Washington was led and organized as much by Black trade unionists as it was by either the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, or Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s own Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. Within the world of organized labor, the march capped an escalating standoff between NALC, the NAACP, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and the AFL-CIO. The conflict emerged out of the ILG's practice of segregating Black and Puerto Rican members into the worst jobs, and then evolved into the AFL's unwillingness to punish local and state affiliates for excluding Black people from meetings, membership, and elected office. The widespread persistence of Jim Crow unionism, combined with accelerating deindustrialization, created a crisis of unemployment in the Black community. This was corroborated by a series of blockbuster reports from the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, the New York City Youth Board, and others, all with the same message: that racial segregation in the labor movement concentrated Black people in menial occupations and the growing ranks of the unemployed. Accordingly, in the years just prior to the march, NALC, the NAACP, SNCC, and the SCLC called to account AFL-CIO President George Meany for not doing enough to curb employment discrimination. When Randolph, Dr. King, and others conveyed the marchers' demands to President John F. Kennedy in August 1963, several of those demands centered on fair employment. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom generated such immense pressure on the labor movement that in the months following, the AFL-CIO and its affiliates agreed to do more to fight racial discrimination in their ranks. Even the state federations of Alabama and Mississippi lobbied in favor of a civil rights bill passed in the US House of Representatives and resisted attempts by Senate Dixiecrats and Republicans to dilute that legislation. By June 1964, the so-called Negro Labor Alliance was confident enough to threaten a national one-day strike on the anniversary of the march if the Senate blocked the bill's passage. The Senate would pass the Civil Rights Act that same month. The Negro Labor Alliance of the 1960s would also help touch off a massive wave of public sector organizing, most famously in the Memphis sanitation workers' strike of 1968, where Dr. King would be assassinated, and the 1199 Charleston Hospital workers' strike of 1969. The public sector wave, along with that of industrial unionism in the 1930s, remain what our late colleague and brother Dan Clausen called the iconic upsurges of US labor history. As in our own time, the mid-20th century was a moment of profound economic crisis. As Tom Segru reminds us, deindustrialization did not begin with the oil shocks of the 1970s or with the ascendancy of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, but rather in the 1950s, when the entire world confronted the crisis of colonial capitalism and the rise of anti-colonial revolution. Though unemployment was mounting everywhere and across the working class, the structural joblessness in the United States that NALC and the NAACP worked to surface was felt most acutely by Black labor, who occupied the very bottom of the US labor market. This precipitated social conflicts between the white and Black fractions of the working class, both within the labor movement and in party politics. Accordingly, Stuart Hall, James Baldwin, and others noted the especially racialized character of the crisis. In time, as the rate of profit fell in response to a relatively strong white-led labor movement in the global north, James O'Connor, Nikos Palantzas, Eric Olin Wright, and Stuart Hall began to write of a crisis of the Keynesian state's capacity to subsidize the contentious peace between labor and capital. With the benefit of hindsight, we now know that forced to choose between its erstwhile corporatist partners, the state chose capital over labor. The white American electorate began its drift toward the politics of racial resentment. And together, these dynamics inaugurated a half-century of neoliberal hegemony, union decline, and civil rights rollbacks. That system is now itself in crisis. And just as in the 1960s, the Black freedom struggle and labor movement are again on the move. The uprising of the summer of 2020, in response to the killing of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, comprised the largest wave of public protests in American history. In the meantime, we have witnessed strikes in education, hospitality, grocery, healthcare, and manufacturing, groundbreaking victories at Amazon and Starbucks, and a 56% increase in filings for union elections. These developments suggest that we are in the midst of another crisis and potentially a generational upsurge. As we consider what is to be done, I want us to bear in mind two dimensions of this crisis. First, crises of hegemony in which the masses withdraw their consent to be ruled are moments of political fracture and heterogeneity. Correspondingly, capital and the neoliberal state, who must now coerce the mutinous masses back into line, are compelled to spread their resources thin to deal with the proliferating mass resistance, in our case, from the white, black, and brown fractions of the working and middle classes. The question before us is therefore not just what is to be done, but more specifically, whether as a movement, we should impose a singular, overarching organizing approach on the heterogeneous left, or embrace that heterogeneity. In this paper, I argue that we must direct our resources and lend every support to the eclectic and sometimes competing organizations that are now emerging organically to address the crisis of neoliberal capitalism. The reasons for this are twofold. To begin, the system appears to be bursting at the particular seams where class domination intersects with racial and gender domination. For example, in their attempt to hail the white fraction of the working class and undercut intersectional solidarity, the Republican Party has advanced a neo-fascist program centered on white supremacy, xenophobia, homophobia, abortion, climate change denial, and so-called election integrity. Unions address some of these issue areas, but not all, and not necessarily well. Worker centers are just as good, if not better, at organizing migrant workers, for example. Additionally, we have 138 million unorganized workers to organize, and we must use every ounce of organizational capacity we already have to reach those workers, and in doing so, increase our capacity. Tactically, this means three things. First, organizing should take place through unions, worker centers, third parties like DSA, ballot initiatives, and allied community organizations like Make the Road and the Restaurant Opportunity Center, as well as environmental and reproductive justice organizations. But second, we should do so systematically as one mass movement. Yes, we should identify leaders to organize their respective sectors, but we should assess them on structure tests using a shared database and set benchmarks for where we want to be in 6 months, 1 year, and 5 years. And then the cadres should convene as a unified body. Thirdly, to get this off the ground, we must recruit the leaders of our eclectic movement to join in common struggle. This will require gatherings like this one, local, state, and regional conventions, and an innovative social media strategy that can put us all in conversation with one another. The goal here is to build trust, get buy-in, and to use Marcia's metaphor, to get in that boat and row together. But if our tactics entail systematizing eclectic mass mobilization, what is the overall strategic objective and vision? Though our tactics are meant to organize millions of workers, our strategic objective must be to defeat fascism, which in the current crisis has emerged as the clearest alternative to neoliberalism. Just a few weeks ago, Viktor Orban of Hungary visited the howling brown shirts of CPAC in the United States, urging them to visualize a self-conscious international far-right movement on a par, I can only infer, with the axis of Hitler, Mussolini, and Franco. If they succeed, we will be yearning for the days of neoliberalism from our dungeons. To defeat the fascists and remake democracy, we must offer our own alternative to inspire unorganized workers and middle-class allies alike. I am speaking here of building a new hegemonic bloc with labor in the lead. In my view, that alternative agenda is economic democracy. Economic democracy is the idea that none of us can be free unless all of us, especially the most marginalized, have power in the workplace and are key stakeholders in the economy. While there is no substitute in the workplace for a strong labor movement that can force the boss to pay higher wages and shift control of the shop floor to the workers, other policies can help further democratize the economy, like public ownership of all utilities, worker representation on company boards, the sharing of profits through inclusive ownership funds that would pay dividends to workers, and participatory budgeting, in which local communities get to decide where to put their public money. In my view, economic democracy must also be an inclusive idea that merges the insights of Black feminism and industrial democracy. When women and people of color encounter microaggressions and glass ceilings in the workplace, we do not have economic democracy because they are forced to choose between their jobs and their dignity. When someone or their partner is denied health benefits because they are queer or transgendered, we do not have economic democracy because that person is effectively excluded from the workplace. And when a supervisor hauls workers into his office and threatens to fire them if they join the union, we do not have economic democracy because those workers must choose between feeding their families and having rights on the job. Finally, economic democracy must also entail environmental and reproductive justice. Working class communities should not have to live with environmental hazards or bear the brunt of religious bigotry. Workers, like all people, deserve clean air and clean water and access not only to abortions, but also to affordable childcare and other resources to raise a family if they want to. We will reverse union decline and organize at scale when workers see that the labor movement is fighting to bring democracy to the workplace and the economy and upend other systems of domination that humiliate their coworkers. That is what Bayard Rustin, A. Philip Randolph, Ella Baker, and so many Black trade unionists struggled for and partly won in the 1960s. Together, and in combination with different approaches and organizations in a constellation of forces, we can attack fascism, confusing our ancient enemy, and ease neoliberalism's passing. The structural opening that we have to lead the world out of this crisis is small, and it will not last forever. But it is here, and this historic challenge falls to us. Let us meet this challenge in all the beautiful eclecticism of George Floyd Square, Amazon Labor Union, and Red for Ed. With our actually existing movement of unions, third parties, worker centers, environmental and reproductive justice organizations, labor centers, and ballot initiative campaigns, we have all that we need to organize for power and build the society that we want and deserve. Thank you.
Okay, Marcia Howard. Because I saw you taking notes.
Oh my goodness. Ditto. Hello, my name is Marcia Howard. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm from the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, and I'm from George Floyd Square at 38th in Chicago. May 25th of 2020, George Floyd was lynched about 263 steps from my home, and we have been there in solidarity and in protest, demanding justice, and justice in the way that we see fit for the 24 demands of Justice Resolution 001. That's the answer to a question that we were asked by the government. Why won't you move? And we said we were waiting for justice. And then they asked us, what does justice look like? The people who make up the occupiers of George Floyd Square, which to my knowledge is the longest political occupation in American history at this point, at 2 years and 3 months uninterrupted. We went and asked what justice looked like. We got the answer to that. And then the people who decided to hunker down and stay at risk to our lives and our livelihoods make up a broad swath of the type of folks in Minneapolis. We are union members, we are nurses and teachers and machinists and carpenters, we're artists, we are musicians, we're stay-at-home moms, we're retirees, we work at shops and retail stores, and we are valets, and we are line cooks. And what we've done was organize ourselves into the type of community that we want it to be. We had to ideate a world beyond the world that we actually live in, a world beyond policing and a world beyond the systems of oppression that we suffered under the yoke of. And then something funny happened on a way to a revolution. People started coming into the square and sitting with us. Now, we've been saying come into the square, but I'm talking about union members coming in, and we started strategizing, and it became this sort of like back and forth energy transferring, and then someone would skedaddle and they would be part of 612 MASH, which is a health organization that started with street medics that were dealing with gunshot wounds in the middle of George Floyd Square and taking care of the residents around the neighborhood. But they were also comprised of nurses that were part of the Minnesota Nurses Association. And I want you to remember that, because that was for the last 2 years. Or me, I'm a member of MFT, but 3 blocks down the road is a school and 2 blocks that way is a school. And so those teachers would bring their students into GFS, they do projects, and then we would sit there and we would talk, right? All of that seemed to coalesce this year when MFT, Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, our ESP chapter, the cooks and the clerks and the bus drivers, all of us declared the intention to strike at the same time. And then we were getting calls, and somebody would just cryptically say, and you better not get sick. And then someone would call Delta, and you better not try to fly. Because what was happening in Minneapolis was that all of us who had been part of activism from 2016, Jamar Clark and Philando Castile, and then George Floyd, and then Winston Smith, and then Dante Wright, and then, yeah, we've had a lot of reasons to march in Minneapolis, but we've also had a lot of reasons to realize that it's all connected. This fight for Black, Brown, and Indigenous lives was this same fight of workers in Savage, Minnesota at Amazon who were peeing in bottles because they weren't getting breaks. Not for nothing, we're looking at Black and brown folk, East African folk, who did not feel empowered to say, I need a break, or I need more money for this job. We were talking to people in our local coffee shops, and yeah, 200 around the country have decided to unionize, and only 3 are under contract. But I'm gonna tell you this right now, you know what'll get you a raise real quick? Y'all all do a wildcat strike and just step off the job, and all of a sudden everybody got a raise. That'll do it. They might not be under contract yet, but they know they can fuck up somebody's money real quick. They sure can, they sure can. And with the power of our organizing, and I don't mean organizing in the traditional sense that we're aware of it. I mean the organizing and being true community. These are everybody, the Twin Cities is like 2 small towns in a trench coat pretending to be in a metropolitan area, right? We know each other, and we know of each other. We know the struggle. We know the struggle of a 29-year-old trying to find housing, and the rent is astronomical right now. And it seems as if they are hell-bent on pricing everyone out of the cities. We know that. And we know that the pay is not commensurate to what they are charging for housing. We see how it's all connected. And so now we're talking to each other, and now we're on social media, and now we're in signal loops. And so something seems to be swelling in this city, and it's gotten people nervous. And all we have to do is sit with each other. And then the city comes running and said, please, can we co-create a solution? Can we talk? And now businesses are like, can you come to the table? So when that Starbucks store came to MFT, Minneapolis Federation of Teachers, they put it on remote Zoom. They counted those ballots, unanimous yes, by the way. And the regional director, because it's a corporate store, they were in their office, and we were there in the union hall as they voted yes. And then we put that on social media, and this huge swell of support. And then people are inboxing you, we're next, we're next, we're next. It is a Sisyphean task to get back to the labor movement of old. It really, really is. But I'm telling you that we can make new moves in the way that we are now, in the way in which we move collectively as a people in community. That will require, though, it will require people communing with each other, talking to each other, and listening to each other in a way that I don't think that we're used to anymore. We're not. We're just not. And I know we're not because I have to do it every single day. And when new folks sit, they will literally look at me aghast, astonished. You do this every day? This is how you do this? Yeah, this is how we do it. But we're making moves. We're making moves by doing it this way. It's not the only way. So this call that you made for listening and looking at the disparate types of leadership that have sprung up is extremely important. We have militant leftists, we have people from DSA, we have all types of leadership, and we talk amongst ourselves. And they may shimmy and I might shake, but we still dancing together. And we understand, I hate to quote High School Musical, but we're all in this together, okay? We're all in it together. We are all in it for the dignity of the worker, and not just of the worker, but also the fact that it is multi-layered. When we say at 38 in Chicago, we listen to Indigenous and women first because we've tried it every other way. Just so you know, your revolution is going to be queer. Your revolution is going to be neurodivergent. Your revolution, all of us going to be on Wellbutrin. We crazy, right? Your revolution is going to be the most marginalized folks telling you something about yourself. And for those of you who balk at that, who are hesitant to believe that those are the people that will have to shape the way we go forward, I would like you to stop and consider whether or not you feel that way because you're not in that group. All right? We've tried it every other way, and where did it lead us? Right? Where did it lead us? And so just entertaining the notion that someone will have a better way to reach the new masses and lead them in a different direction, but the direction we need to go before we fall off that cliff, all right? You have to entertain that notion that somebody may have a clearer path to the new revolutionary zeal that we need to get us out of, I love the phrase, easing the passing of neoliberalism. Because it is like, yeah, it's on its way, right? But where are we going from there? Because we cannot let that die completely and then have its cousin fascism, and yes, I said it, its cousin fascism take the place of it. Because right now, that is what will fill that vacuum. It already is. It's got its big toe in the door. At 38th in Chicago, South Side, we call it backdooring. And that's what fascism is doing right now to the United States. It has backdoored us, got its foot wedged, and that's what it's ushering in. Because fascism, I have to say, is pretty attractive. when you feel lost. It really is. It is an answer to a question. How can I be strong? How can I have meaning? How can I be important? How can I be considered? How can I be seen? And as a laborer, my union answers that question for me. Out of many, we are one. That's my union, right? Without the Mussolini mustache, right? But for a lot of young folk, because they don't have that yet, this is what they're turning toward. That's the only answer that they see. And so all these other alternative types of leadership that is still on the left, that is still about the dignity of the worker, that's still about using that power, not just in labor, not just in your work life, but also politically. Once the people in power see that, they come a-calling. I tell you, I got on a plane and I came to Phoenix. I don't really leave the square, and I don't have to. I'm not sitting there on some royal throne waiting for folks to come see me, but I can tell you this, between the square and my house, I carry a throne in the seat of my pants. I don't go to leaders. They come to me. They come to us. They come to GFS because they're not quite sure what this is, but they know that it's something. They know the power of our built community and our built movement space. They recognize that, and they're looking toward it for endorsements. They're looking toward it for horse trading. When it is time for us to harness that power and utilize it, it's going to be for the good of us all. I ain't going nowhere without my people. I ain't going nowhere without my people. Who are your people? And if it's the worker, if it's your fellow citizen, if it's us, then you need to consider a new way of doing things. And a lot of it is just leaning into the old. Miss Eliza, the gatekeeper of GFS, says, we are a village and a community. And it's quaint and it's provincial, but it's real. And so getting the American worker to feel that way again, that we are a village and a community, that someone cares about them and working toward them, that is the way that we can harness this new zeal to take us into a newer labor movement. I'm telling y'all, you gotta do it. You have to. You have to. Because it's either that way or we're going to fall into, no, it's just that way. No other choice. No other option.
To put it mildly, that's a hard act to follow. I am with Cedric on 90% of what you said, maybe even more, I don't know. But particularly the point about the looming threat from the right. I mean, I think we all kind of know that, but it's real. And they are really well organized. They are very busy systematically trying to take apart what's left of democracy, not just in this country, but more broadly. So you know that. I guess the good news is that so far anyway, despite some of you heard Monica McDermott and Sasha talking this morning about regular people who've bought into that right-wing program for all kinds of reasons. The good news is the vast majority of people in this country, at least when asked by survey takers and pollsters, are on our side. They're horrified by the skyrocketing inequality, the lack of health care, the homelessness. They want paid sick leave for everybody, paid family leave. Even, by the way, that's one thing I've studied in detail, paid family leave, like 80% of Americans say they are for it, and that includes like conservative, religious, Republican, old men. I mean, it's white people, it's sort of, and they're we saw in the cross-racial popular protests about George Floyd's murder that the majority are also with us on that question. They are with us on reproductive rights, et cetera. So that's not our problem. I mean, yes, there is I don't know what it is, 25% who are in the other corner, and that's terrible. And I don't know, my own experience is they're not going to be convinced by rational arguments, but I mean, that would be wrong. I'd like to be wrong about that. Okay, so where does that leave us? So we have this minority that is positioned to take power and to take over, and yet really they're not particularly popular. They don't have the majority of support. The only reason they win elections is by, suppressing votes and stuff like that. I do think that still the biggest institutional player on our side, with all its warts, is organized labor, as well as the other institutions that Cedric listed, but most of those don't really have much in the way of resources or expertise or staffing. They're feeling their way and doing all kinds of exciting things, but without that institutional presence. And meanwhile, as I was talking about yesterday, and as I think most of you know, we have this new generation of activists who are the troops, if you will. We've got, there's this sort of old, tired dinosaur set of institutions called labor unions, and then this new energy coming from young people, most of them college educated. We're going to hear from Rebecca, who's, I believe, an example of this in a little bit. They are what social movement scholar Doug McAdam once termed biographically available. These are people who are precariously employed in many cases and have some time and energy and have already developed that intersectional perspective that we've all been talking about yesterday and today. It's second nature to that generation. Many of them are also very critical of capitalism. We've seen this from Occupy Wall Street to Black Lives Matter to the Bernie Sanders campaigns in DSA, and now to the new wave of union organizing. Small scale as it is, it, I think, is emblematic of that spirit and commitment. So how do we bring all this together? I don't know if I can imagine quite the unified 100 flowers bloom, but at the same time, one or coherent movement that, I'd love to see that, what Cedric advocated. I'm not quite sure how that fits together, but within the labor piece and the labor space of that, it feels to me like the challenge is, how do we bring together the institutional resources of old labor, if I can call it that, and it is mostly old, and the new wave, the new generation of young activists who have got the union bug now, but are pretty separate from that set of institutions. It's a little more complicated than that, but basically there's a gap. So, some of you might have seen a little piece that I think it was published in the American Prospect that two labor journalists, Steve Greenhouse, who used to be the New York Times labor journalist, and Harold Meyerson, who's one of my favorite journalists on labor. Some of you may know his work. They wrote a thing saying, which I completely agree with, which I think is a response to this moment, saying that, for established unions, this is like a historic opportunity, the new organizing, small scale as it is, and they acknowledge that, because despite the NLRB statistics, this is really a drop in the bucket in terms of reversing the relentless decline that we've seen over the past few decades in unionization overall. How do we marshal the resources and expertise, which despite deunionization, it's still pretty considerable. Unions do have a lot of money. They have a lot of staff who know the landscape of how you get through all this stuff, right? That's something valuable. How do you put that together with the new young energy without crushing the, now I'm going to go back to Cedric's horticultural stuff, these beautiful flowers that we see growing at places like Starbucks and Amazon, and they are beautiful, but they are fragile. They are in great danger of being crushed by employer opposition and labor law problems and all the rest of it. We know this. How do we put those things together? I feel like that is the challenge. And, you know, with that, and while overcoming the legacies of exclusion that you called Jim Crow unionism, I actually think by that time there was a lot of other kinds of unionists. Historically, unions have moments of exclusionism and racism and sexism and so forth, and at the same time, other moments where there is solidarity across those boundaries, and that's been true throughout the 20th century. Actually, I'm sure you know this, but so that's one edge of that spectrum, but it's not the whole story. So, but it's still there in the organized labor movement, some of that Jim Crow sentiment. It hasn't completely been stamped out, and now it often takes an anti-immigrant form. So the unions have to step up to this challenge if we're going to win. That's what I think. And yes, the worker centers and all the other groups too, but the unions are the ones with the money and the resources. And, you know, I'm not sure we can win without that. I'd like to think that like wonderful work that Marcia's doing is enough, but it helps. You need that. So that's my hope, that somehow these things do come together into, I don't know if it can be the kind of, I don't know, it wasn't quite a party you laid out, but the sort of coherent single movement that's all on the same page and using social media and talking to each other. I don't know if that's feasible, but I think this more limited program maybe is possible. And anyway, that's what I think we should be doing or working toward. Thanks.
Let's see if I can cohere this hot mess that I'll use my teacher brain here. So I have a lot to say about all of these things. I don't know if I can concisely do it, so I'm going to give it my best. For background, I started in Chicago Public Schools teaching in 2004, and I was elected to my first political kind of appointment in the building in 2010. I was elected to the local school council, which is the governing board of the school, and that's where I got my first taste of power. I became the voice of teachers, and I went, oh, I really like this. This is a good fit for me because I'm going to say it anyway, right? Might as well put a mic in front of me because I'm knocking down people's doors no matter what. But I was radicalized into that position from somebody who treated me very badly, and it was my principal at the time, who was an egotistical, narcissistic white male, and I could not stand him. But thank you, Mr. Bennis, if one day you watch this. Because what he had said to me one day, I got, and this is a story that if you ever want to read the long form of this story, I was actually interviewed for Maximilian Alvarez's book that came out, The Work of the Living. My story's in there. So this is an excerpt from that story. That book just came out on August 23rd. He interviewed people from across the nation, COVID stories, different workers, and how we organized. So the reason I want to tell you this story is because radicalizing people is how we move people, and opening their eyes to what is literally right in front of them and helping them come to consciousness is how we do this. So my story is it's not horrific, but it really, really set me on a tangent that I still think I'm riding high 24 years later, whatever it was, right? So Mr. Bennis, I came in at that time, jobs were aplenty in Chicago. I could not find a job out of college, right? I had no experience and I got hired as a sub. Well, I became a temporary assigned teacher, which meant I had all full responsibilities of teaching, but he paid me as a substitute. No offense to substitutes, but I'm a certified teacher. I should be paid more based on what my contract says. So I brought it to his attention and he was like, oh no. And turns out he used the wrong line item in the budget to pay me. And I was missing $10,000 by the time the third month of school started. And I was fuming, like beyond fuming. And I called my mom. Mom, this happened. She goes, go to your union. I go, right on. Show up to my union and knock on the door. Miss Collins, she is a retired Chicago Union co-chair of the Black Caucus for Chicago Teachers Union. We hang out every time I go home. She's amazing. And she's where I learned all my union thuggery from, right? But I agreed with all of it. And she said, all right, now here's what we're going to do. I said, all right, I'm down. What are we doing? Let's go. She goes, we're going to stand outside of the principal's office in broad daylight, and we're going to say the word grievance out loud. I said, oh, I am down for this. So we did that. We played, and there was this great crew of old veteran teachers that were all union thugs come and hang out with me in the front office on Fridays. And we're all wearing our red shirts and doing our thing. And no, we didn't have red shirts. I think we had stickers at the time. And we would pretend like talk about stuff and slip the word union anytime or grievance anytime administrators came by. Turns out that really terrified him. And it became a threat, a very credible threat, that I got invited for a sit down. And I wish I had my Weingarten rights out, but I knew my rights. And I said, I'm going nowhere without my union rep right next to me. So I end up in there. I got back pay. I got my $10,000. And this mother said to me, aren't you glad that I served like a savings account for you? I basically saved you all that money. Speaking of the 10 grand that I just got dropped back in because I threatened a grievance. And from that moment on, I swear to you, I promised myself I would never, ever not have dignity in the workplace ever again. And I have used that to fuel my fire. So when I showed up here in 2017, I was working in West Phoenix at Sevilla West in the Alhambra district, which is the largest refugee population in all of Phoenix. And the reason I worked there was for two reasons. They had a community school setting, which is what I was used to from Chicago. They had a family resource center. They could get bus passes, clothes, translations, backpacks. And I went, that is how I want. That's the community I want to be in, because that's what I had in Chicago. We had parent classes, parent rooms, full community school. So I ended up there. And the second reason, it's the highest paying district in all of Arizona, because it's considered a rough population, which is horrific. And I hate that I'm saying that to you right now, but that's the reason they pay teachers more, is because it's war pay, is how they say it out here. And it's really disgusting. And so I ended up there and I was like, yes, this is great. This is my great community. I'm going to rock this. I'm a math and science teacher. This is my jam. And I got in there, and on my first union meeting, they tried to sell me car insurance to sign up for the union. And I literally almost walked the F out of there, because I didn't hear the word power. I didn't hear about working conditions. I didn't hear about dignity in the workplace. I didn't hear about democracy. All those things I was used to hearing in Chicago were nowhere to be seen, but I was in a union meeting recruiting me to join the union. And you know what happened? I did not join. I didn't join the union until 8 months later, when I thought I needed a lawyer for basically calling a strike. So when I was in that building, I learned something about where I came from and the power of the union in Chicago, and the knowledge I had gained through organizing my own building during the 2012 strike. I had to step up because my rep was one of the regional delegates and had to go and help regionally organize in the city. So I stepped up. One of my first things is I put my name on that phone tree. You know how we got those phone trees where you got to call the next person, you call the next person. And putting my name on that paper in Chicago literally built my knowledge to how do I actually organize people. And I learned how to build escalating actions with structure tests. And I didn't even know that that's the knowledge I was gaining when I organized in Chicago. So I show up here, I'm stopping, in my workplace, and I don't have a workplace document that describes my rights for my contract. And that really bothered me, because here you get a year-long contract, but it's very vague and ambiguous, so they can treat you however they want. And I was not having it. So I kept asking, I started agitating 2 weeks into being on my campus, are you guys okay with this? How do you feel about this? This is what I feel. What do you think, right? I did all my organizing talks, and it just dawned on me that consciousness was not in existence yet at my campus. I kept saying, It never says that I have to go to these staff meetings from, 3 to 4 p.m. I have kids at home. You really think you're going to take my family time? The answer is no. And everyone's like, well, you can't say no. Watch me. And I said, no, I won't do that. It's not written in my contract. And I realized one thing after another, the pieces we're putting in place, that no one on my campus knew what their actual rights were. They had no idea. And they're just working in this system without consciousness about what they can and cannot do based on their contract. Because there's one line that says, at the principal's discretion. Oh, red flag. You see that in your contract, you go right to the union. So that's what I did. I went to the union. And I took for granted where I had been in Chicago. I really took that for granted. And that's my mistake. I was very naive. I knew that there was a big red wall. I knew these things. I knew all the stats because I've been paying attention since 2010. But what I didn't realize is what Chicago had given me was actually a gift that I could use to then organize other people. And so when I was listening to Cedric, I just kept thinking about just like, how do we do this? Because being here in this state, which is very hard to be in this state coming from where I'm from, it is something though. There is this massive opportunity to raise that consciousness, to radicalize people in the workplace through their conditions, which you know can be better because you've experienced it yourself, like I did in Chicago. We had so much power that even saying the word grievance made him go find my money. That's what all workers need, is the power to say, no, I deserve dignity, this is my right, and this is how human beings exist. And so for me coming here, I realized that there's a massive opportunity to organize the unorganized. And that has been my driving force behind what we do in Arizona Educators United. We built, and now I'm going to get into the stats here so you can understand how powerful the movement was here. There were only a handful of us that started this movement. There were 4 main leaders, 9 people total, but 4 of us had any organizing experience, myself included. And I became kind of the actions liaison because of my experience from Chicago. I said, you know what? I think I can do this. I know what to do. And so little by little, we built a system of networks like you talked about. We built a massive network so much, there's a book written about it. And now there's even another article written about our digital organizing strategies. Because what we coupled was digital organizing strategies plus relational deep organizing in schools. We combined them together to build the most powerful movement by combining those 2 things. Oklahoma teachers relied on social media. West Virginia teachers took it right out of the Chicago Teachers Union playbook, and they even said that, right? They went and did some deep organizing. Kentucky had a little bit of both. But where we succeeded is we positioned what we called liaisons. We built a network of over 2,000 volunteers that we were calling liaisons, but they were really site reps, right? But we didn't want to sound union because union is dirty language here, right? So we had to be careful about how we talked about unionism and how we talked about collective power. We didn't come out, look at me, I am as militant as the day is long. But if I show up like that in a space like this, I'm not going to get very far because it's not the mentality here like it is where I'm from. Here, we had to be very sugar-coated. Join us for the movement. We need you for the movement. It's about the kids, the movement, right? Because it is about the kids at the end of the day, but we had to use those feely, nurturing, compassion, community words instead of fists in the air all the time. It's fists in the air later, but at the beginning. So what we did is we asked people to volunteer. Join the movement. Join the movement. We can't do this without you. I wanted to scream boots on the ground, but I kept saying, we need you. Join the movement, right? Warm and fuzzy, warm and fuzzy. And what we learned is people wanted a space to be organized. How do we plug people in who might not have the know-how? They don't have the, cultural, like Chicago's very union town, right? Here it's not. How do we get people and move them into these spaces. We found a way. And we asked them to fill out a form. And then we asked for people to serve as leaders. And what we did then is strategically teach them how to map their workplaces next. They didn't know that they were mapping their workplace because we didn't say, now you're going to map your workplace. And the reason you map your workplace is because you want to blah, blah, blah. What we said is, we need you to talk to every person in the community. Walk around campus. Bring a form with you. Go to the office, go to the cafeteria, go get the bus drivers. Wall-to-wall organizing was our strategy, just like West Virginia. But we asked them to strategically have those conversations and check off who did they get, who did they not get, and try to move those numbers every week. And the way we had a structured test was how many people can show up to wear a red shirt. Start taking notes. How many people you got this week? All right, next week, can you get 5 more? Next week, can you get 5 more? So we had little tiny baby structure tests along the way. People had no idea that those were structure tests. We knew, but nobody else needed to know. So we didn't have to talk and walk like a union because we were using the organizing tactics that we needed. And we weren't the union, quite frankly. We were an external organizing structure that pushed the union to where they wanted to go. Most of us, so let's get back to the numbers. We had 2,000 people sign up at over 1,200 different schools across the state. Some of them were union site reps, so it was kind of like a double up, but many of them are not dues paying members. So let's do it by the numbers. There are 60,000 Arizona educators. 20,000 or 1/3 of them are dues paying members. That leaves 2/3 of folks who have no labor formation to be plugged into. When we were done organizing after 8 weeks with many structures tests, we had 57,000 people take a strike authorization vote. So all I upset, woo! And all I have been thinking about since the day we took, and you can ask Eric Blanc, for those of you who know Eric Blanc, I can't stop obsessing about this number. And how do we apply this to the whole movement that I wish we would build right now? Like, I want to talk about it, let's just do it. How did we successfully bring 37,000 people who were unorganized into an organization and a structure and move them to do something as high risk as a strike? And so if you're sitting here nodding, I want more research on this. People need to learn from us, and we need to share how we did this. Yes, Eric has a great book about it. Yes, he wrote another article. That's a great start. But if we want to get to what you're talking about, if we actually think that's possible, sign me up. I want to be one of the leaders for the educators. But I obsess about that all the time because I also work in DSA. I was on the DSA Labor Commission. I also work on the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, and I'm helping people organize their shop floors. And I also am building structures with National Educators United with the same mission, is getting more people who are unorganized to be organized and help them build power in their workplaces. So my question is, if that is all what we want, who is actually going to be the leader that makes this happen? Because I will sign up in a heartbeat. I keep dreaming it's Sarah Nelson. I keep dreaming it's Bernie. I keep dreaming it's Marcia, right? People like Marcia. And I would go with you. But how do we do that? So I heard you talk about DSA unions ballot initiatives. I do all of those things. And we have a ballot initiative here that if you live in Arizona, please help us out. We brought it here today for the vouchers, the universal vouchers, which will drain even more money from public schools, as you all know. But I'm in all these places and I'm everywhere, right? You've heard my name across it, but I want the same goal you want. I want to broaden the movement, and I can't do it alone. I want to be with my people. And I'm 41. A lot of people think I'm a lot younger, but I'm an elder millennial. I hate capitalism, and I always have. And I didn't know it was capitalism my whole life until I became an activist. And I went, oh, that's the thing that's been pissing me off my whole life. It's capitalism, right? But you guys, how do we, we can talk about it all day, but can somebody put it on paper, get the people there, because teachers and nurses are hanging out all the time. We know we're in strategic logistical positions, and UPS Teamsters. We are pinpointed in the community to seriously disrupt it. Teachers, nurses, logistics, train workers. We had solidarity left and right here in Red for Ed. Train workers, UFCW, everybody pitched in for Red for Ed. And we did that here in one of the worst political landscapes. So if we can do that here, a bunch of teachers who just love children. You like my sarcasm. If we can do that here in the reddest of the red, in the conservative of the conservative, if we can do this in neoliberal hell, we can do it everywhere, is the point. So I'm in. If you're in, somebody's got to lead this, because I'm in. Sign me up. All right.
You don't have to go up there and talk like you. No. Responses, comments from our wonderful panel. I will say that, yeah, I always wonder what I was mad at too, but it's funny when you realize what you're mad at. That's it's always a good realization. Yeah, comments from all of you. Yeah.
With the new movement called conscious capitalism. It started in Australia.
Okay.
It's second place for starting here in Tempe, and they're trying to expand who the stakeholders are in business from just being, shareholders to being the employees, the community, the supply chain, and they're very much into sustainability. It's a powerful movement starting here in Tempe, Arizona, and I'm wondering if you think there's any way to work together, and if so, what would that look like?
Are you involved in conscious capitalism, in that movement, in that idea?
A little bit, yes. I go to a lot of the meetings. I'm not a business, owner. But these are business owners that are moving this, and it's very exciting. Do you think it's possible to work with them? And if so, what would that look like?
Does anyone want to take that? I think I'm the wrong person to actually answer this question. Conscious capitalism.
It's really hard to respond without knowing a lot more about it. I guess I would like to think that they're part of the potential anti-fascist majority that we were sketching before, but I don't know enough yet.
Anytime anybody asks us who we will work with, we define our values. And if we start anywhere, it would be with defining our values and moving from there. And if there is malignment, then the answer is no, right? Because we only work with people who share our values.
Sure, Cedric, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, you just asked like a very, very old question. It's like a generational struggle, within the left. Do we need the petty bourgeoisie? Do we want these fucking shop owners who vote for who are historically the base of the far right and continue to be the base of the far right in Europe, right? And all I can say is, if they're the base of the far right and could be the vehicle through which fascism emerges victorious in the United States, then we need to deal with them somehow. I don't know if they become part necessarily of the hegemonic bloc, of the bloc that leads us out of our crisis, but we at least need to neutralize them because they are a problem. They are historically and forever and today a problem. I think it's somewhat encouraging. I mean, that's not my cup of tea, conscious capitalism. I agree, it's an oxymoron. But I think that, you know, in a similar way, I mean, to what my co-panelists are saying, we need to do things differently. You know, there have been a lot of people who have pointed to this group of people. And what has the labor movement done about it? Nothing. Okay? So they're not my cup of tea, but I think we need to think about it. Does that make sense?
So thank you all. That was a great panel. I think that, like, we all know that you substantially agree more than you disagree, but just for the purpose of furthering the strategic discussion, I did hear a few divergences from Cedric's initial vision. I just want to draw those out, see if you all agree with the characterizations first, and then sort of like what you make of the differences. So Ruth, obviously you had a sort of more narrow vision focused on the resources that organized labor has in this moment and the importance of deploying them, and we're sort of more skeptical or just didn't know what to make of sort of the larger eclectic vision that Cedric had to offer. In Rebecca, what you just said, right, the sort of like extremely impressive site liaison network that you all built during the strike, that was very much about organizing, right? That was not bringing together the eclectic iterations of current activists to do things together. That was getting people who were completely unaffiliated with what was going on and bringing them in, right? So to some extent, there's a kind of mobilizing, organizing division there, right? It's less about uniting the various iterations of like existing this current wave of activism, and more about thinking strategically about how you bring people in, right, unaffiliated. And then Marcia, this is sort of harkening back to something you said yesterday. I think you mentioned the 5 C's that you talk about in the square, right? I might be forgetting, but commerce, crooks, cops, commercial media, community organizations, right? And that's what I was wondering about, because there are a lot of groups doing a lot of things out there, right? But there are some community organizations, maybe, you know, because of their different funding streams, that want to participate in social justice spaces, but don't necessarily have the same orientation. They aren't going to be rowing in the same direction, to sort of use the relevant metaphor. So it does sort of seem like, in one way, that just sort of relying upon uniting different eclectic strains of existing activism might incorporate actors that aren't necessarily going in the same direction. So that was just my attempt to sort of highlight some of the differences. I'm curious to see what you all make of them.
Every day that we start a meeting, we do the 5 assumptions of George Floyd Square, and normally I don't like codify them by putting them on record, but I'll tell you, assumption number 4 at George Floyd Square, we assume that not every, do you remember number 4?
I have to go through all of them.
You know what number 1 is, you know what number 2 is, you definitely know what number 3 is, and
Yeah.
number 4?
Not everybody in this square, and not anybody in this circle or in this square necessarily has your idea of liberation in mind.
Not everyone in the square has you have to assume that not everyone in that square has your idea of liberation in mind. And so when you are gathering different actors together and you think you're all going in the same direction, and you realize someone just, you know, gets on a dinghy and then swims out because someone offered them this, right? And they're not going in your direction, we can try to get, you know, disparate groups of people that we find that, you know, we all coalesce around the idea of worker dignity, or we want higher pay, or we want political power. And so we're together for a moment, and then all of a sudden our eyes furtively dash left and right because we realize, oh, that person was only with us for this amount. They're not with us for the whole amount. What you can't do is fall into this trap where you're looking at every single person that you're trying to organize with You're looking askance. You're like, I don't trust this person. A lot of movements, we devolve into this idea that everybody's an op and nobody is, truly with us. There are ways in which we can work with folks. Metaphorically, we're at 38th Street. Yeah, you at 42nd. We trying to get you to 38th. You're not there yet. But this idea that you spoke to, sharing the same values, you're constantly checking in and saying, do you share the same values? This is it. And you lay yours out, they lay theirs out, and see whether or not they jive. And as long as that they're meshing, you can continue to go forward and start building coalition. It's right now, DSA, like our newest council member is part of the DSA. She spent many a day on my porch, right? But now that she's elected, we're recording this, but I don't fuck with her like that no more because now she's on city council. When I say I'm protesting the city, baby, I'm protesting you too. Like, that's where we are right now. But with Democratic Socialists right now, there's somebody in California that's mired in controversy. You know what I mean? But that doesn't mean that we're not working with our people in Minneapolis. The difference between fascists and us is this. They don't care. There's no litmus test for purity for them. They will take anybody and their numbers will remain strong. We need to be very, very careful about the way in which we move so that we can start building. That does not mean have somebody in our boat that is systematically trying to drill a hole in it while we're going. But it does mean we need to be, considerate about how we start gaining people because they might not be on 38th Street yet. They might not be, but you need to work with them. And then they see, y'all got it good over here. This is good for you. This is good as far as dignity and pay and power, where you're affecting change in your own life and you're making things better in education and healthcare, and just the way in which we live our lives. It's better over here. And if you believe that it's going to be better with a sustained and healthy labor movement, it's going to be better in the way in which we're going to work for this new movement, invite other people to it, see where you can work together, see if they're willing to put their back into it too. It's going to involve you looking at folks you may not have looked at before, though, talking to people that you wouldn't have talked to before. But it's going to take all of us to build this new movement. It will. It really will.
I have one thing, I promise. When I was considering, what everybody had spoken about, there was, and forgive me, Ben, if I'm going off on a different tangent, but I do want to say something about unions because when I got here, I like the idea of labor unions being the people who are going to move this movement, but it ain't going to happen without boots on the ground and the rank and file who are actually going to push these union leaders to get out of their comfort zone and their ivory towers and get out in the streets with their people. So there's a difference between what Ruth said and I said is like, here, the union was viewed as not powerful, of doing nothing for decades as neoliberalism trashed our public education system to the point where it's barely recovering. So I don't want to put my faith, I guess I want to put my faith in unions, but I know better. I know better than that, because even the people I worked with here that I pushed personally with my background that I have, they were very much intimidated by me. And that actually worked in my favor because they knew I was coming and I wasn't going to stop. I was going to push through no matter what, whether they were with us or not. It didn't matter from my perspective. I wasn't even a union member at the time. And so when we built power outside of that structure, a new energy was born. And that's the energy we're seeing at Starbucks and ALU and all of this. It's all connected, right? Even Trader Joe's now, which is personal for me because I have a very close family member and I've been trying to help organize Trader Joe's people. That energy comes from the energy we built outside of the union. And when the union joined us, not the other way around, then the resources were in our hands. And I also believe our strategic, like we had a strategic position being fourth in the Red for Ed strikes. First, it was West Virginia. Unions didn't work well with them. Tried to even shut it down, and they said, forget it. West Virginia United went at anyway, even though the union said, come back. They said, I don't think so. It ain't about you, it's about us. Kentucky, same thing. Union was not on board. Oklahoma, same thing. The union wasn't on board. I think they learned their lesson by the time it got to Arizona, that it was actually strategically in our advantage, because that power, that energy we're seeing, and then Denver and UTLA and Chicago again, and St. Paul folks, we as leaders, we meet behind the scenes. You probably all don't know this, but we all hang out. We hang out in spaces, and we hung out in the COVID era, right? The 2 years we organized together, coast to coast. So we are doing that, but some of us are within unions and some of us are outside of unions. And we have to be mindful that unions are not always the answer unless they have people pushing them to do the right thing. So we can't just say, we need the union's resources. Of course we do. But if they're not willing to take the risk and get out of their comfort zone and screw the status quo, it ain't gonna happen. So that's what I want to be studied, is how did we push the union so that the resources became ours, because that's our money. And then I finally joined the union. So that's my money too. So I just think about that when we say unions.
I think that's right. At the same time, well, I'm just going to repeat myself, I guess. We need them as well. We need them more than, than we need conscious capitalism or something, because they are not for fascism, whatever else they're for. But you're right about the comfort zone. And I think that comes from the reality of being under attack for decades makes people very cautious and timid. And I think part of what's great about your generation is you're fearless. You don't care. You've got good reason out here. So, but I also think we kind of have to, to some extent, despite having agreed with you on that, there's a kind of, often in the left, a kind of false polarization between top down, bottom up, rank and file, union bureaucrats, as if you took all the union bureaucrats and lined them up against the wall, et cetera, the revolution would happen. It isn't like that. We need to do the kind of stuff you were talking about to get them on board. And I think, like what you said, like with the teachers' wave of red state strikes that you helped lead, it happened. They saw we need to be part of it. It took a while, but they did. And it's not yet happening with Amazon, I have to say. As I understand it, there's a few exceptions, but the union establishment, or whatever you call it, has not stepped up to that one. Starbucks is a little different because it's actually SEIU that's sort of behind it. But interestingly, they're playing that game too, because it's sort of like we call it Starbucks Workers United, as if it's like some independent thing like the Amazon Labor Union. But can any of them win without those resources and staff? I don't know. So, I mean, it's a challenge, absolutely. But I would like to see us get beyond that dichotomy. My own view, as I've argued a long time ago, is top down versus bottom up. It's not versus, we need both. It's not either or, it's both and. That's the only way you can win, because we don't have enough power to win any other way. That, you know, we got to line up all the stars in a row and go from there. Not that it's easy to do, I realize, yeah.
So you'll notice that, or I hope you remember that in my talk, I did not say that SEIU and Unite Here and UFCW and AFSCME need to be the vanguard of this movement. I never said that. And that's deliberate, right? Because I don't actually think that they are the vanguard of anything, okay? They are part of a mass movement. And in practice, what is actually happening is that when we've had massive campaigns of organizing unorganized workers, they have been largely led by insurgent rank and file movements that union officialdom was not especially comfortable with. I mean, as Rebecca just said, I mean, it happened over and over again, right across the country, right? Sometimes AFT or NEA was like, eventually kind of like on board, or they were on board first, but then they pulled back. I mean, it's a shit show. But now that it's a little bit different, right? Because now the AFT, I mean, I go to these regional meetings where like AFT are in the room and they invite, Alex from UTLA and, various people, and they go, how did you do it? It's just like, there's this great story of a French socialist named Auguste Ledru-Rollin. And the story is that he's watching this group of Parisian workers walking down the street, and he says, "Oh, those are my people. I am their chief. I should find out where they're going." Right? And that's what this is, right? In practice, where the hope and the optimism and the movement building is happening, where all of these different folks are working together in solidarity. Right? Rebecca is in DSA. She was in the insurgent rank and file caucus within the educators movement here, and then she became a union member. Right? So, Marcia. You're involved with all kinds of folks in GFS. Right? And here's my last point. I agree with you that these are the kinds of models that are the future of this mass movement. If the mass movement is going to be anything, it'll be built upon that kind of mobilization. But the problem is these are all happening in local places, state level kind of work, and we have not gathered in the same room together as one mass movement to say, let's do what they did over there. Let's do what these folks did over here. And let's count how many workers we organized. And where do we want to be in 6 months? Where do we want to be in 1 year? Where do we want to be in 5 years? When are we going to do a strike? Like this kind of stuff. This is happening in a very localized, unsystematic way. And that is a problem, right? Because for lots of reasons, but chief among them, as I mentioned earlier, we have 138 million people to organize in this country, and we are not going to organize them, just kind of like doing this and that, and nobody's talking to each other. And we're facing down a fascist threat that if we don't check them soon, they will be in power. And when they are in power again, they might be in power forever. Okay? That's what we're facing. And so that's why I said what I said. It might not be economic democracy. Let's just get in a fucking room together and have a fucking vision. Can we say, what are we for? What are we for? Could we be in a situation, right, in which somebody at the Chicago Abortion Fund says, I am for reproductive justice and I'm for economic democracy. Ma'am, what are you for? I am for environmental justice and I'm for economic democracy. Do you know what I mean? Like we need a vision, right? We need a vision. We need a set of principles, shared values. We need to get in a room together. We need to figure out what the goals are, what the benchmarks are, and timeline that shit out. Because we are in a struggle for the future of this world, not just of this nation, but of the world, right? And so that's all I have to say.
Let me take 2 more questions, and then we're gonna take a break. What? Yeah, that's what I was gonna call them. But you want to call them people? You're good at that. You're a team.
That's what I do at the square, but come on.
Okay, so I'm gonna push because I'm a fan, and what I'm hearing. Yeah. So I'm gonna push on this point a little bit because what I'm hearing in sort of different iterations is we need an articulation of an intersectional working class that is self-conscious, directed in at least an assemblage of related goals, and has a sense of strategy. Who or how what is going to be that avenue or that articulating agent? Because what I'm hearing is that it's not going to be the unions, certainly not going to be our two institutionalized parties. What's the avenue, right? We need in the Gramscian sense, we need a party. But who's going to be that party?
So let's take a second question. Oh, stop. I'm sorry, we're done.
Sorry, am I in your periphery?
We were, sorry.
So I am very energized by this, but I'm also wondering why we haven't talked about the international level. Because I know that this is we're talking about the US and what needs to happen here, but the energy coming from Latin America and Africa and Asia and is plural, is visionary, and is long-standing. I know that this whole social movement unionism that we thought was really new in North America has been going on for generations in other parts of the world. And even though movements are local, sort of by nature, and organizing is local, capital and fascism are global. And there was the World Social Forum 25 years ago that tried to bring together global movements in the exact same way that you're describing. It hasn't been so robust lately, but who knows, it could be coming back. So what is the international dimension of this?
Okay.
Two questions. One about who and when and where and how, and the other one is about the international. The first response was going to be a very cheeky me saying, not it. And I do that purposefully. We've been out there for 2 years, and I said it was only this year where I feel as if my life is at risk, and it's the work that I'm doing around labor. It's the work that I'm doing around the union. Once you start fucking with their money, that's when things are getting really risky. Because they're very aware, they're keenly aware that international folk aren't at GFS. They come, they sit, we're in community, right? People from Venezuela, people from Brazil, people from Colombia, people, Central America and Latin America right now. Right now it's extremely fluid as far as communication, because these movements, especially in Brazil, these movements that are couched in this struggle for Black lives and this struggle for worker dignity, this struggle against fascism, it's resonating around the world, and so they all come. They come from Chile, they come from everywhere, and we are in community and we are in communication. And so it's bigger than just an intersection. And I'm fighting right now the perception nationally that I am attempting to position something as the epicenter of this movement. And I fight against it. If you notice, we're in an academic conference. I am an English teacher. I teach the history of the English language and medieval lit, and I'm cursing and I'm staying in a register that would not be deemed academic. I do that shit for a reason. I'm not ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille. I'm doing this for a reason, frankly, for my survival. Because when we are ready, there is so much at risk in this nation right now. When we are ready, keep your head on a swivel. That's all I'm gonna say.
So like the question you asked about who, I need that answer because I don't have it, and it's all I think about. Like sun up to sundown, it is literally all I think about. So I'm gonna rely on this guy to help me figure this out, because it's all I live and breathe all day long, because I feel the movement. I feel the energy. I see it in my own family, who I hate to admit this, but my father-in-law's license plate says Trump Q on it. Yes, this is my reality. So he's a former Scientologist, if that helps you out in any way. So I think it's about the brain and neural patterns, quite frankly. So I'm a science teacher, I can say stuff like that. Right? No? Maybe. Either way. So I don't know the answer to that. That's why I joined DSA. Quite frankly, because it was a new energy and all my friends were doing it. No, but so I don't know the answer, but I will speak on the international, because I personally have a lot of experience with international teachers movements. What you don't know is I also work for a company called Social Movement Technologies, and I help people. I just taught a class on Facebook organizing for women in Africa who are trying to beat back the oil company. So there's solidarity in a variety of ways that I've experienced in an international capacity. I teach classes on how to organize on Facebook now, because apparently everybody wants to know how we did it. Great, I'm a teacher. I have those skills. I can teach anybody anything, right? Because I know how to do it. And that's why teachers are the best organizers, by the way, because we literally move people from A to B to C for a living. So internationally, I personally, along with many of my fellow comrades in this movement, have been invited to speak at the National Education Union across the pond. They come in, how did you guys do this, right? We're all learning from each other. We have workshops together. We talk about organizing strategies. Italy, I've been to Italy, like I've been talking to Italy, because my last name's Garelli. They think I'm totally Italian. My husband's Italian, I'm not, but whatever. So they saw Garelli and they were all about it. And so I've been talking to them for over 4 years now. And then I've been, there's book studies on the Red State Revolt. I've been zooming into China at 4:00 in the morning, and Canada. And then we have the Tri-National Conference of Mexico, Canada, and US, where educators have been coming together for almost 12 years now to discuss North American solidarity. So like for the teachers world, this exists, and they're taking stories and lessons from the Red for Ed movement, and like UTLA and Chicago Teachers Union and all of that. So I think I can only speak on that level just because I'm in the teacher movement, but we are international and we do speak to each other internationally. And I'm sure you've been out many places. Her and I met each other a long time ago. I asked her to come speak at something I was doing, right? And so we're all in this together. And I think educators realize that. I think nurses do the same thing, because we have Elizabeth Lalage, who's one of the NNU organizers, who works with National Educators United to team up on nurses and educators. So like, I know it's happening in the educator and nurses space, just because that's the world I live in. But for all of us with this working class consciousness, look at what's happening with the railways right now. I mean, that is the most working class consciousness I have ever seen on TV in my entire life of what's going on there. And I'm like, I will eat this up all day long. But look at that. Did that exist before? Them getting on TV and pushing back and talking about working class demands like they are right now? It's amazing. So I think there is an international piece is what I'm talking about. I've personally experienced it with the educator movement. People are talking to one another no matter where they are, and learning lessons, and just helping each other figure it out.
So engaging in international struggle is an abstract concept, right? Because to engage in international struggle, you have to do something at home first, right? And that's why, folks from all over the world are going to George Floyd Square, and why she's talking to Chinese educators or Italian educators, right? Is because they've done something. And when you are in struggle, right, people in struggle elsewhere will reach out to you. I remember the pizzas being delivered on Tahrir Square during the Arab Spring, right? Ordered by American onlookers, okay? International solidarity happens when you do something at home, and right? So which gets me to Johnny's point. And this is going to sound very trite, but the party is us, okay? I don't mean institutional electoral party, like challenge the Democrats and the Republicans. They can have the fucking party system. I don't need it, okay? We are the people we have been waiting for. We're the ones who are having this conversation right now. There is no reason why we cannot be the nucleus of the mass movement. Who else has a better claim than us? I mean, it's all arbitrary. I will say one thing though, because I want to revise something, and this goes back to Ruth's point about the top down versus bottom up. Because there are unions who are organizing at scale, who organize thousands of workers at a time, and it is run by union leadership. I'm thinking specifically of folks in home care, right? Folks who organize thousands of people at the same time, okay? I'm thinking about the multi-city strike mounted by Unite Here when they struck Marriott. When I began organizing in the early 90s, Marriott was unorganizable. All of a sudden, the Marriott in 7 cities goes down, right? So this is not, you know what I mean? UPS with the insurgent slate that just won, not UPS, the Teamsters with the insurgent slate that just won. They're going to engage in a titanic struggle with UPS, right? The union officialdom is in the building, okay? They're doing things, but it's super selective. It's like, if you want to find out where the stuff is happening, you need to go and find the left cadres in the labor movement who are doing the work, and some of them are in this room right now, okay? So I want to revise that because, I feel like we have to together, like, be open to like different analyses and check ourselves if we think we're wrong. Because I think listening to Ruth and looking out into the faces here and seeing who's represented, I remembered, oh yes, actually I'm wrong. So on that point.
I don't really have an answer to these questions. I do agree that the international stuff happens organically as things go into motion. I think we've all seen that. I don't think you can do that top down. And I don't know about the party vision. I don't know. I first glommed onto this generational phenomenon when Occupy landed on my doorstep in New York City. And as you know, that became very quickly a global phenomenon as people saw it meteoric rise and later fall, of course. But it did start this new wave of social movements that we've been talking about these 2 days. That was for me anyway, that seemed like the beginning. And it launched this new generation into motion that's still in motion. So that's important. I will say, at least I'm not that generation, as you can see from the hair, but I remember, and I see it every day, this deep suspicion of parties, even established unions in that generation, this idea of leaderful, not leader, there's all that, which makes it challenging to imagine how's this all gonna come together. So I don't know the answer. I do think we need a structure of some kind, but I have no idea what it is myself. So I can end on such a dreary note.
It's all good. I can end on an even drearier one. I'm like looking and I'm writing like, who do I mess with? And then I'm like, Nelson Mandela's grandson has spent quite a bit of time in the square. We're going back and forth. And I think he went to a university to study movement space and organizational skill, but keeps dipping back to the square. But I think about like a negotiation. We're Justice Resolution 001. You can find it at bit.ly/George Floyd square -A, all lowercase, where, yeah, they'll figure it out. Our justice resolutions are negotiated with the city council people, the county commissioner, the governor, and the president, Justice Department, all of that. So we're going back and forth. But the thing I wanted to focus on was there was some language that the mayor and I and Janelle, we were sitting there at his dining room table trying to hammer this stuff out, and he really wanted me to put some measures in. It was about qualified immunity, and he was like, well, what about, putting language in there, like if someone fraudulently changes paperwork, then that's grounds for being fired. So it's a disciplinary reset. And then I'm thinking about, well, in my union, I'm a teacher. What if I accidentally counted somebody absent who was actually present, or vice versa? That would be grounds. So I'm constantly thinking about unions as it relates to the absolutely abhorrent, fascist, raggedy ass police union in Minneapolis. It is a scourge on our existence, the police union. Not just in Minneapolis. Oh, okay then. But in Minneapolis is horrible. It is horrible. And so I'm fighting a union while I'm fighting for unions. And it's, I think about what you just said, and I'm proud of you for amending and thinking about, there are people in union spaces that are badasses that have been rocking lately. I'm like actual, just regular union leadership that have stepped up to the plate, and they feel this moment as well. And I don't want to discount them just because we may have a few gray hairs, do not discount that. There are people who are willing to they don't have to step aside for young bloods to come in. They're swelling with this optimism as well. And they have a fever, they have the fight within them. And those are the type of people that I want to mess with. Those are the type of people who were like, let's go. And so we won't discount that. You say top down and bottom up. I say boots on the ground, but those people can be boots on the ground too. And they quite often are. And so what we want to do is to make sure that the newest people that would be our union members don't be so disaffected and feel as if they don't want to be part of any type of institution. That is not helping us whatsoever. That's not helping at all. And I'm happy to say MFT, we're getting so many people signed up. And I actually thought we were going to have a little bit of fall off after this strike, but more and more people, like every event that we're having so many people sign up. People want to be in a collective for good, for dignity, for fair wages, for better conditions. They want that. And a lot of them don't know how it's done. And come on, y'all, we ain't got Pinkertons whooping our ass on the line. We just have to band together and start strategizing and organizing in a way where everyone feels as if they're literally taking the reins of this nation. Not just the nation, the world. We're doing nothing short of saving the world at this point. Our world. And we need to start acting like that.
Please join me in thanking our terrific panel. We're going to break for about 15 minutes, so shorter break than usual, so that we can get back, and then we will hear from Regan, who will close us out today. So 15 minutes, and then we'll be back in here. We'll call you back in. Thank you very much.
Hey, wait, can we get a picture?